The year 1914 marked a turning point in human history. The world had never seen a conflict like the First World War. It was a war that would engulf Europe and spread to other continents. Millions of soldiers and civilians would perish in the deadliest conflict the world had ever known. This war would be called the Great War. It would have profound and lasting consequences for the entire world. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, ignited the flames of war. The Austro-Hungarian Empire blamed Serbia for the assassination and declared war. A complex web of alliances, years of mounting tensions, and a fervent sense of nationalism transformed this regional conflict into a global catastrophe. The world watched in disbelief as Europe, seemingly at the pinnacle of civilization, descended into chaos. No one could have predicted the horrors that would unfold over the next 4 years. The Great War would redefine warfare, shatter empires, and leave an indelible mark on the 20th century. At the heart of the conflict lay a complex system of alliances that had been forming for decades. These alliances were meant to maintain a balance of power and prevent war. However, they ended up having the opposite effect, dragging nations into the conflict like dominoes falling one after another. On one side stood the Triple Entente, consisting of France, Russia, and Great Britain. Fearing German aggression, France and Russia had formed an alliance in the late 19th century. Great Britain, wary of Germany's growing naval power, joined forces with them in 1907. On the other side was the Triple Alliance, composed of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Each nation felt bound by these treaties and obligated to defend its allies. This meant that a relatively minor incident, such as the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, could spiral into a major international crisis. The system of alliances created a climate of fear and suspicion where even small disputes had the potential to escalate into a full-blown war. Following Austria-Hungary's declaration of war on Serbia, the intricate network of alliances quickly came into play. Germany, bound by its treaty with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia and France. Great Britain, obligated to defend Belgium's neutrality after Germany invaded the small nation, declared war on Germany. Within weeks, the major powers of Europe were at war. The armies mobilized with remarkable speed and efficiency. Millions of men marched off to war, full of patriotic fervor and believing the conflict would be over by Christmas. However, the early optimism soon faded as the war settled into a bloody stalemate. Germany's Schlieffen Plan, a bold military strategy designed to avoid a two-front war, aimed to quickly knock France out of the conflict before turning its full attention to Russia. This plan involved a rapid advance through neutral Belgium, a move that ultimately backfired by drawing Great Britain into the war. The initial stages of the war were marked by mobile warfare. However, the conflict on the Western Front soon bogged down into a brutal war of attrition. Soldiers on both sides dug into elaborate trench systems that stretched for hundreds of miles across France and Belgium. Life in the trenches was a horrific experience. Soldiers endured constant shelling, machine gun fire, and the ever-present threat of sniper attacks. The trenches were infested with rats, lice, and disease, making life miserable for the men who fought there. The fighting on the Western Front was characterized by a series of costly battles that resulted in hundreds of thousands of casualties for minimal territorial gains. Battles like the Somme and Verdun became synonymous with the horrors of trench warfare. These battles epitomized the futility of a war where millions of men were sacrificed for yards of mud. Section 5: Turning Points and Technological Advancements. The Great War witnessed the introduction of new technologies that would forever change the face of warfare. Machine guns, tanks, airplanes, and chemical weapons made their deadly debut on the battlefields of Europe. The machine gun, with its ability to fire hundreds of rounds per minute, gave a decisive advantage to defensive forces. Tanks, first used by the British in 1916, offered a new way to break through enemy lines. Airplanes, initially used for reconnaissance, were soon outfitted with machine guns and bombs, adding a new dimension to warfare. Perhaps the most terrifying innovation was the use of chemical weapons. chlorine gas, first used by the Germans in 1915, caused agonizing deaths by suffocating its victims. Mustard gas, introduced later in the war, inflicted severe burns and blisters. The use of chemical weapons violated international law and added a new level of horror to the already brutal conflict. Section 6. The Home Front. A World at War. The impact of the Great War extended far beyond the trenches of Europe. The war had a profound impact on the home front, transforming societies and economies in unprecedented ways. Governments mobilized their entire populations for the war effort. Factories were converted to produce weapons and munitions. Women entered the workforce in record numbers, filling jobs previously held by men. Rationing became commonplace as food and other essential goods were diverted to the troops. The war also had a significant impact on the lives of women. With millions of men away fighting, women took on new roles and responsibilities. They worked in factories, drove buses, and served as nurses, challenging traditional gender roles. The war effort gave women a new sense of purpose and empowerment, which would have a lasting impact on the women's suffrage movement after the war. Section 7, 1918. The clock runs out. By 1918, after years of brutal fighting and millions of casualties, the tide of the war began to turn. The entry of the United States into the war in 1917, along with the growing exhaustion of the Central Powers, tipped the balance in favor of the Allies. The United States, with its vast industrial resources and fresh troops, provided a much-needed boost to the Allied war effort. American soldiers, known as doughboys, arrived on the Western Front in large numbers, bolstering the depleted Allied ranks. Germany, facing increasing pressure on multiple fronts and a collapsing economy, launched a desperate last-ditch offensive in the spring of 1918. The offensive initially made some gains, but was ultimately unsuccessful. The Allied forces, bolstered by American troops, launched a counter-offensive that pushed the Germans back. Section 8. The Treaty of Versailles. Seeds of future conflict. On November 11, 1918, after more than 4 years of devastating warfare, an armistice was signed, bringing the First World War to an end. The guns fell silent and a sense of relief swept across the war-torn world. However, the peace that followed would prove to be fragile and short-lived. In 1919, the victorious Allied powers convened in Paris to negotiate the terms of the peace treaty. The Treaty of Versailles, signed with Germany, held Germany solely responsible for the war and imposed harsh penalties on the defeated nation. Germany was forced to cede territory, disarm its military, and pay heavy reparations to the victorious Allies. The treaty also included a war guilt clause, forcing Germany to accept full blame for the conflict. The Treaty of Versailles was met with outrage in Germany. Many Germans felt humiliated and betrayed by the treaty's harsh terms. The treaty sowed the seeds of resentment and instability in Germany, contributing to the rise of nationalism and extremism in the years that followed. Section 9. The Great War's Legacy. A World Reshaped. The First World War was a watershed moment in human history. It was a conflict that left an indelible mark on the world, shaping the course of the 20th century and beyond. The war resulted in an estimated 40 million casualties, including soldiers and civilians. It shattered empires, redrew the map of Europe, and led to the rise of new ideologies and political movements. The war also had a profound impact on technology, society, and culture. The war's end saw the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires. New nations emerged from the ashes of these empires, reshaping the political landscape of Europe. The war also gave rise to the Soviet Union, the first communist state which would play a major role in global affairs in the decades that followed. The First World War was a tragedy of unprecedented scale. It was a conflict that left a legacy of loss, destruction, and enduring trauma. The war serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the importance of diplomacy and international cooperation in preventing future tragedies.